สวัสดีครับ Um, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning, IOD members. My name is Kuvet Chen Batanabit, the CEO of Thai IOD. As usual, I have a great pleasure to hold another director briefing. This time it is about what your board needs to know about C-suite's development. Interesting because we use the word C-suite, not even CEO. So before we start, please be informed that the operation during the activities, because of this, you'll be on mute. And if you have any question, go to chat and send your question to all panelists for Q&A at the end. This morning, we have a guest speaker from DDI, and thanks to DDI for supporting us once again. Khun Matthew Paese, the Senior Vice President, Practice Leader of DDI. And before you hear from Khun Matt, I would like to say something about the background of this session. There are a number of business owners, successful business owners and successful business founders who now try to pass his legacy to the next generation. And we had a lot of chat with them, and they expressed their frustration that even though they prepare their son or daughter to be ready for the CEO job that the founder right now is taking. The announcement has been made. They have done the job rotation for the successor. Even sometimes shadow the founder to the meetings and observe how he performed. So there's a lot of frustration that some of the founders ask us, so what more can we do? Because the problem is that the performance of the company after that successor has become the CEO is not good. It's not good. So let's hear from Khun Matt how what has been done, and is it I could say that the word, is it a set to failure? And what we could have done differently in order to get the C-suite ready to be the head of the team and the head of the organization. So let's welcome Khun Matt. สวัสดีครับคุณ Matt ครับ
Thank you, Khun Kulvek. Thank you, everyone. It's good to be here. Good morning. And on behalf of myself and my colleagues at DDI and our friends and partners at IOD, thank you for joining us today. Khun Kulvek and I have had a series of conversations about this topic and others. We did a session a number of weeks ago about assessing executives for succession. And this one today is about developing them. So once you know what you need to do or who you have for the right positions, today our discussion is about what to do to help them get ready faster, to be prepared for key positions. So Chavisa, if you would please go to the next slide, I'd be grateful. Thank you so much. So I do know that all succession, and I know that you know, any succession decision is risk. Every succession decision, particularly at the CEO and C-suite level, each one is risk. And if you move from left to right on this diagram, what this diagram basically means is that if you are going to manage risk, you have to understand your current readiness and your current gaps. And then in order to understand that really accurately, you have to have good, accurate assessment. And then you have to target learning and development. So one more click, and you can see that today we're going to focus on how to create development and learning to close the critical learning gaps that help leaders become ready for key positions in the C-suite. What I'm going to do in about the next 15 minutes is move very quickly, talk about 5 challenges or mistakes that boards make very frequently when thinking about this. And if you'll indulge me, what I would like to do is describe all 5 of them very quickly, maybe 15 minutes at the most. And then Kunkovek and I are hoping that you will bring your questions. So you may want to grab a pen or a pencil or something to take a note with, and note the questions you have as I go through these 5 mistakes that boards make when they're trying to develop candidates for not only CEO, but the entire C-suite. All right, next slide. You'll see all 5 mistakes all in one. Narrow plans, over-reliance on in-role experience, undisciplined growth plans, coaching without accountability, overlooking team capabilities and gaps. I'm going to briefly give an example of each one of these mistakes. And one or more of them may occur to you as something that you've seen happen. It may be something that you're witnessing right now or something that you're worried about. And I will say there are some relationships between these problems. They are not completely distinct from one another. So let's take the first one. Next slide. Narrow plan for developing successors. The mistake that a lot of organizations make is thinking that if they name a CEO successor, that's enough. Next, please. Here's an example of an energy sector client that had, it's a large energy sector utility-based organization in multiple energy streams, and the board had identified a CEO and a successor, and they gave the CEO, essentially they gave the CEO the responsibility to manage the succession plan. They said, hey, CEO, it's your job, go build the succession plan until the market began to change. And until they began to change, for example, their investment portfolio, and they began to get more aggressively into renewables. And suddenly the business landscape started to change, their risk portfolio began to change, and they started to wonder if the current CEO and the successor that he had named were the right people for the future. And that caused them to think not only about the CEO job, but about a number of other jobs in the C-suite, the COO, the CFO, the chief strategy officer, the chief customer officer. For example, they had a multiple region business, and one of the strategic recommendations that they were wrestling with was combining their customer base from one region with another region. That was a major strategic decision. It had a lot of moving parts and required someone who could think in a very strategic way about the future of the market. So the board became concerned that only having a focus on the CEO would be a problem. And in fact, it would have been. So this board of directors expanded their view, and they decided to assess and begin to develop the entire senior team, not just 1 or 2 people for CEO. They began to gather data, and for the last 2 years, they have been watching the development of all of their C-suite players, their entire senior team, not just 1 or 2. And again, in the interest of focusing on the future. Okay, next one. The second mistake is over-reliance on in-role experience. This is the mistake that boards make when they think that, well, imagine, for example, that it's an owner of a business, and the owner of the business is looking at his daughter or his son, and thinking, look, if I simply create a series of jobs for my son, or I create a sequence of jobs that my daughter holds before I think of her for CEO, that's development. Jobs equal development. And I think a lot of organizations do this. They simply plan a path for a successor by virtue of the jobs. You have to have a job in finance, have a job in sales, have a job in operations, have a job in technology, and perhaps another job that's a staff function like human resources. And once you've done the rounds, or perhaps once you've led enough of those functions, then you're ready to be CEO. Next slide, please. This is a mistake that a lot of organizations make. And I'm going to give an example of a large retail organization that merged. And what they did is assess, these are two organizations that come together. They had information on their people, but once the organizations merged and they built a new strategy, they looked again, they reassessed everyone. And what they found is that there were some very strong development needs. People needed things like learning how to lead cross-functionally and network across an organization that they're not familiar with. They had to practice skills like clarifying accountabilities for teams that had not reported to them before, or teams that perhaps were learning new processes or adopting new procedures and ways of doing things. Those are just a couple examples of very clear areas that they identified that were areas needed to be developed. But what happened when they got into the merger is they said, well, look, she's going to get that new job. That new job is going to be in a key operations position. She's going to learn how to network in that job. So the job, this is sort of like the last one a little bit, but it's basically saying that once they get in the job, that's enough experience. That will give them the experience that they need. Except it doesn't always do that. Just because she gets into an operations job doesn't mean she learns how to hold people accountable. And so that can be a second mistake. Let's move on to the next one. Undisciplined growth plans. This is where the owner of a business says, look, my daughter doesn't have any experience in technology, so what I'm going to do is hook her up with my chief information officer, and they're going to work together for the next 6 months, and that'll be enough. I just connect two people, and my CIO teaches my daughter technology, leading the IT functions, and perhaps digital transformation, and that's enough. Well, next slide, please. If we actually look at what can happen here, this is an example in a high technology manufacturing organization where the CEO had a named replacement. He identified the leader that he wanted to replace him. He then created the job COO and put this leader in that job. Part of that was because he said he's had a lot of operations experience, but he hasn't led the entire organization. So I want him to do that. Except what then started to happen is the COO, who really needed to learn CEO skills. The CEO basically said, look, here's what I want you to do. I want you to watch me. And if you look at that quote in the upper right, the board asked him, the board said, how do we know that you're developing your candidate in the right ways? And he said, don't worry, I've got the game plan right here in my head. Meaning the CEO had a plan for how he was going to develop his successor. He put him into the COO job, but the COO had already had operations, and he thought, so the successor was in the job thinking, well, what am I supposed to be learning? What am I supposed to be doing? How am I going to learn the CEO job? And what the CEO was thinking was, just watch me, follow me, come with me. You'll come to board meetings, you'll do the things I do. Meanwhile, what was happening is the COO was losing credibility in the organization because he didn't have any discipline to his growth plan. He just was sort of put into this holding position where he would wait and watch and observe and join meetings and be part of things in order to see. Meanwhile, his leadership skills and his leadership influence was eroding. And that's what happens if we don't create growth plans that have some specificity. Next slide, please. What we did for this leader, and we do for many leaders, is we identified some of the areas that he really needed to learn if he was going to become, it says CFO, that should say CEO at the top. But if he was going to become CEO, he would have to learn risk management and investor relations and managing a portfolio, except no one had identified these things. So we helped them by mapping them out. And we evaluated, is this something that the successor has done? Has he mastered it? Could he teach it to someone else? And this was a way for the CEO to then have a more structured conversation with the board to say, here's how our successor candidate is learning in the COO job. He has a COO job, but these are the areas where he's also learning other parts of leadership and about the CEO job that he hasn't learned yet. All right, 2 more very quickly. Next slide, please. Coaching without accountability. Sometimes there are challenging developmental situations that are difficult for a CEO or a board to tackle. Let's say the CEO has a son who is particularly confident, perhaps maybe a bit arrogant, maybe doesn't listen to feedback so well, maybe doesn't ask for coaching, and maybe the son is not aware of this and does not get feedback on it. The owner, the father, doesn't give good feedback and has a hard time confronting his son about this difficult developmental assignment. And so what happens is perhaps they hire a coach. Next slide, please. So coaching without accountability. Here is a case, this is a diagnostics and research and testing organization, and they had a candidate who was in a big finance position, and this is a person who was identified as a likely successor for the chief commercial officer role, which was a new role they were trying to move into a number of new markets. But this person was just like the leader I was just describing. He was somewhat arrogant. He was very self-reliant. He did a lot of things on his own. His team was not very strong. He was very smart, very gifted, very good strategist, very good at execution, but he always did things himself, took a lot of accountability away from his team, and so his teams were not so strong. So the CEO said, let's get a coach. So they got a coach to try and help this leader, except then the CEO disappeared. The CEO was nowhere to be found when talking to this individual about arrogance, about overconfidence, about not asking for feedback. And that never works. If we're going to coach someone through a difficult challenge, if an owner of a business is going to ask his son or daughter to become CEO and there's a difficult coaching challenge, the CEO has to stay close. Or the CEO has to appoint some board members to stay close. Who is accountable for tracking progress against the learning objective? That's the question. And so without accountability, no development happens. And it's easy to say, let's just get a coach for that, but not if someone doesn't stay close to see if the coaching actually has effect. Okay, 1 more, very quickly. And then I'll finish my 5 mistakes and we can begin to discuss questions. Sometimes boards and CEOs only think about CEO succession, but they don't think about the team. They don't think about how the team needs to come together in order to lead the business. And in some organizations, the senior team needs to be a team. They need to operate in an interdependent way. In other situations, the senior team can operate more independently, but in either case, it's important to understand the people that are on that team, how they interact, and how they work with one another so that you can understand how to manage the business. Next slide, please. So this is an example where a healthcare organization, very large health system, in fact, had an unsuccessful CEO. and that CEO had been asked to leave the organization, and they needed to very quickly find a replacement. So the board got very involved in identifying a replacement, and they did. They found a replacement. They found a CEO replacement, and they took the position that it was the role of the new CEO to build the team. So here's what happened. It's a very interesting situation because the new CEO came in, and because this was a very specific culture, very collaborative culture, people who take very good care of one another. It's a health system, right? So the CEO came in, and although no one told him this, he developed the assumption that he should not do anything to change the team too quickly. And even though the team was not functioning very well, so about 6 months after the new CEO got on the job, he was in a board meeting, and the board said, "Why are you taking so long to fix the senior team?" And the CEO said, "Well, I didn't know you wanted me to move. I thought it would be a bad idea to move so quickly to repair the team because I would need to replace some people. And I didn't think I should replace people so quickly." And the board said, "Well, that's part of our problem." And the CEO said, "Well, we didn't discuss that. How did I, and so they just were not aligned in their thinking about what do we need to do with the team. And so just like the very first mistake, sometimes boards get caught up just thinking about the CEO, but it isn't just thinking about additional positions, it's thinking about the whole team. How is this team going to function? How are they going to represent our culture? There's some very interesting research about what former CEOs regret after they retire. And more often than anything else, retired CEOs regret not making faster decisions about talent on their teams. They wish they would have done it more quickly. They wish they would have been more decisive. And a lot of CEOs make the decision that this healthcare CEO made, and they decide to wait. But a lot of boards of directors prefer them not to wait. So what does that mean for you as a board? It means have the conversation. Talk not just about the CEO, talk about the team. Look at the entire team. Next slide, please. Take a look at the way people on your team fit together. These are pairs of senior team members with some information about their unique characteristics, so we can see how different pairs of people may work together. We may put them in pods of 3. We may put them in groups of 4, and look at how our mosaic as a team comes together so that we can understand where are our group strengths, where do we need to work, where do we need to develop. So that last one about the team is the final and 5th mistake. Next slide, please. There's just one final thing I'll leave you with. As you're thinking about getting CEO candidates, C-suite candidates, executive candidates ready, the biggest mistake is to think that you've arrived, that now we're ready. Because the truth is you're probably never ready. So you should always be preparing. You should always be evaluating. You should always be developing. And so Kun Kulvek, I know you're going to help me, and I can imagine that you have some observations and questions already, and I hope all of you in the audience are thinking of and sharing your questions as well.
Thank you, Kun Matt. I found that this is really relevant, but there are so much information in the past 20 minutes. Could we look at the slide which has the 5
all 5, absolutely,
and then just kind of summarize that again, and I will try to summarize, and you please correct if what
of course,
okay,
please go right ahead.
But before this, before I summarize, I feel sorry for the founder who they think to themselves that when they found this business, they had nothing. They did it from scratch. and they give everything, all the tools to their son and daughters or successors. And, you know, they are not ready that I used to be 30 years ago, and what's happening? Okay, so that's the whole scenario from their point of view. So the first one is to ask narrow plan for developing successor. Is almost like using the old lens to look into the future.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yes.
means that, and maybe that old lens is through the owner, the founder's lens, or the board of directors generation, that is the father's generation. That,
Yes.
oh, the world has not changed, so you know, you just the successor, you just look up to your dad and perform like that. So that's the first flaw. Okay, the second is that they need to understand that job rotation is a subset of development, but not all. And there are gaps of the, because job rotation is according to the present organization chart. But the present organization chart might not support the future.
Right.
So that crack of skill, like you mentioned, the people accountable or cross-functional management. There's no such thing in job rotation, right? Or
That's
even
right.
technology or social media might not exist in the current organization structure.
Right.
The next one is that we need the blueprint of the senior team, because that blueprint has to reflect everything in the number one and number two that I just mentioned. It has to reflect the new environment, and it has to reflect the skill that was needed today or yesterday, but needed tomorrow.
Right.
The fifth one, the fourth one is which is coaching without accountability. So this one, you know, there's a dilemma that this the owner, the founder, are so confident because they build the business themselves, and over, and sometimes their children are overconfident in another uh, aspect, that they are the second generation, and they will in Thailand we call they will be Thakgyak. So Thakgyak is the business leader, right? So with this, things might not go well because coaching is not about that. And even if you have a coach, it's more like a tutor than coach.
Right.
Because coach is more profound than that. Coach is about development. Coach is about parenting.
Right.
The fifth one is, okay, we can't build a Superman. We have to build a what do we call a teamwork adventure, or people who can help that CEO perform at his best. And that team and that dynamic might not be the same dynamic as his father. So that's all my summary.
It's terrific. Thank you for that. I think it's a very good summary. And you know, if there's something that is a point that probably is part of all five of them, it does, you know, people ask us this question all the time: is she ready? Is he ready? Can he do it? Can she do it? You know, I think if we all ask that question and we look at the history of executives and leaders who've been put into positions, the answer is almost always yes. They're ready to do it. They can do it. The question is, how will they shape the role? How will they shape the organization when they begin to do it? And because we are all working in an environment that is changing so quickly now, more than ever. It is more challenging. Executives fail more frequently than they have ever failed before. And they don't always get fired, but they get described by their organizations or their shareholders or their HR leaders as not having been successful. Probably 4 out of 10 times, our research would say, executives fail within the first 18 months. And again, they might not be fired, but they're described as not being successful. Why is that? Is it because they're bad leaders? I don't think so. I think it's because jobs are getting more difficult. Businesses are getting more complicated. Change happens more quickly. There's more to know. The competition is more challenging. Strategies have to be more clever. And so there's a lot more ways you can fail nowadays. And so how do you play defense against that? You play defense against practicing the things that are risk areas for you, practicing the things that could get you in trouble. So if I'm an overconfident leader, that could hurt my culture, and that could make it difficult for me to execute strategies that are suddenly different. I might have a hard time engaging people around a new approach if I'm overconfident or arrogant or not good at engaging people. So a responsible board of directors doesn't just ask questions about whether or not there is a successor or whether or not there is a successor for CEO or a couple of other positions. They look at the CEO, the key positions, they look at the team, and then they say, what is happening with the development of these people over time? What are they learning? What challenges have they encountered? How have they taken on new approaches? What new leadership approaches have these leaders adopted in recent years, months? And if you can answer that question and point to new ways that leaders have solved challenges, new skills that they've developed, new experiences that they've learned to master, then you have a team and leaders that are growing and they're increasing their readiness. You'll never be perfect. You'll never be 100% ready, but you will at least be continually practicing.
Okay. Good, Matt. Let me summarize that. So
Please.
we say that environment is getting more and more difficult, challenging. So we have to think about a team work that work, not a Superman that work, because there's no way one person is going to be able to manage everything, especially when that person is overconfident, that has its own blind spot, right? So my key takeaway here for me is if the board has to understand the dynamic of the C-suite. It means that because some of the boards, they only communicate through CEO and they only know CEO. They don't work with C-suite.
Right.
So what do you mean by the healthy relationship of the board and other people that are not the CEO, like CFO, COO, or even one level down?
Good question. Think of your skill matrix. Skill matrix might be something you think of as how one leader matches up against a key position. A team has a skill matrix against a business scenario. And that, I think, is what we would say. So when we help an organization look into the future, we ask the board and the CEO to do an objective confirmation of what is going to be necessary. And then we evaluate the team against 3 or 4 key factors. And so that's what we mean by evaluating a team. I also see that there are some other questions coming in. Shall we start to take some of those?
Sure. I just okay. The first one is is just a comment that we have to speak closer to the mic. The second one is question from Kun Pandita Buri. With the current COVID situation, are there any particular issues to be priority for transition period? Resources are limited. Obviously, time and team are stretched.
Yes, very, very much so. Also, time and team are stretched. There's a great deal of change, and most executives right now will tell you that their job is very different than it was 1 year ago or 18 months ago. Almost every single one. Their job is somehow remade. Some people are fortunate, their businesses haven't been affected as much, and their jobs are very much the same. Most executives are not in that place. Most of them are encountering some new kind of change. So, and yes, there are resource challenges, etc. So this is why we find it worth the extra time and effort to stop briefly and think very carefully about priorities. And there are ways to help teams and executives do this without reshaping a strategy. Your strategy may still be your strategy, but most organizations are having to think about different ways of getting there. And that means stopping, taking a look at my job, breathing for a moment, and thinking, how am I going to get this done? How can I realistically ask my team to do what has become so challenging? And we find a lot of executives privately, they don't say it out loud, but they privately struggle with exhaustion. They privately struggle with confidence. They privately struggle with optimism. And so it is a very difficult time right now. In our coaching practice, we hear every day executives telling us about how I can't talk about this with my organization, but here's what I'm worried about. I don't know if I have the right answers. I'm not sure if we have enough time. I'm not sure if we have enough resources. So the only way you can navigate that is to be very thoughtful and not try to go too fast and not try to do too many things at one time. And that's prioritization. So
I guess the word
wonderful question.
taxation is $1 million question. Because the management are firefighting. So
Right.
some of the things are urgent but not important. Some of the things are as urgent and important. Some of the things are important but not urgent.
Very well said. Very, very well said. And I can give you, if I took 5 minutes, I could think of at least 10 or 12 examples just off the top of my head right now of teams of senior executives who will tell us that they are not aligned in what they're working on right now. They have not stopped to align their efforts because things are moving too fast, because there's not enough resources, because they're not sure what to do. So what's worse, having not enough resources or continuing to pretend like you're making progress and just ignoring it? I think you have to, at some point, stop and say, what can we do? How can we get aligned? And I think a lot of teams of executives struggle to confront each other because they try to own the space that they're responsible for and do the best they can, as opposed to stopping and saying, what are we all doing and what are the most critical things for us to do first, second, third?
Yeah. That is very important right now, but the succession planning to a lot of people is important, but it's not the most urgent thing on earth today.
Yes, yes.
How could you put the discipline, like you said, into developing something that is important but not urgent? It's almost like exercising.
It is to some extent. Although a small amount of structure can go a long way to reshaping the way people think and the way they're pouring their effort. There's another question here, Kunkulvek. How would we as CEO understand clearly what the board wants? Definitely, they want a different CEO that fills in the flaws of the current CEO, but they also want as good as the current one or as conservative. Superman cannot fit all of these in one person. You can't get all of these capabilities in one person. So how can the CEO and the board be aligned in what they're looking for? And I would say two things to that. One is, I think at IOD you call it a skill matrix. At DDI we call it a success profile. One is to think very clearly, what is the profile of success, and let's not expect perfection. So that's number one. Actually, I think I'm going to say three things. Number two is if you have a successful CEO, a very successful CEO, it is important not to try to replicate her or him, but to think of the job and the new people and what they are like. We've seen a lot of organizations get stuck trying to replace a successful CEO with someone who's just like her or just like him. And that never works. You can't replace a person with someone just like him or her. But what you can do is find someone who is sufficient in moving the organization forward. And that's important because you have to create a platform for a new person to be successful, even if you're sorry to see your existing CEO go. And these things you can discuss, a skill matrix, success profile, characteristics. You can put that on the table and discuss it with your board and say, here's what we think is essential. Here's what we think is more important. Here's what we think is less important. We're going to get a profile and we're not going to get perfection. I think that's probably the best we can do to align our thinking on what we're looking for.
Okay. Sounds like it's an art and science at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But you can take a lot of the gut feel out of it. Boards are famous. All of you know this. You're on boards because you're very experienced, because you've been successful, because you have a track record of making decisions and judgments that has resulted in success. That means you trust your instincts. Except your instincts are different from the board member next to you and the one on the other side of you. So if all you do is all think about instincts, you have a bunch of different opinions, and then you have trouble making agreement. So you have to together look at a profile and evaluate it together. And then you can become aligned in what you're looking for.
Wow. So trust is very important in that sense. Two more questions.
Okay.
One from Kun Charlotte. No regard. Apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Should the board only invite CEO to the board meeting, or other C-suite as well as such as CFO? I think this question came from when we talk about that the board has to get to know the whole C-suite, not only the CEO.
Yes. I think so.
Okay, but is it? It might be a little bit cumbersome, to have all the C-suite in a board meeting, or are we doing like a team building or retreat where we can, get a large group of people all together and get board to understand the dynamic of the C-suite? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on the business. There is a continuum. Some organizations have a senior team that's a group, and they are not interdependent. Some organizations have a senior team that's a team, and they need to work together in order to make the business successful. So the first thing you have to do is evaluate yourself as a team and say, where do we need to be on that continuum? Because truthfully, if there is a multi-business enterprise and these businesses operate very interdependently, there may not be a strong need to build a lot of teamwork. If there are separate cultures, if there are separate organizations, and that's okay, maybe the team part of it is less critical. But for an organization that has an enterprise where there is a single culture or there is an identity and a purpose for one large organization, and there's value in a shared cultural experience, or there's value in initiatives that are multifunctional, in those cases, then it probably makes sense to spend time learning about how the team actually works together. For example, can we have difficult conversations? If we are talking about different strategic alternatives, is it okay for us in the appropriate settings? I don't mean necessarily in front of a room where everybody's there, where you have to embarrass people in public, but in the appropriate settings, can we talk about what we disagree with, or what we're not sure about, or what we'd like more data about? That's what a healthy team does. And I think it's okay for a board to ask questions about whether or not a team is able to do that, or whether they know if they're able to do that. Have you practiced at it? Do you confront each other? Do you address tough issues? How do you do that? I think those are good questions for a board to ask a CEO and a senior team.
Yeah. There is another question, which is a little bit long, from Kun Chu Cha C1 with, when we talk about mistakes, about learning objective, and the accountability is to who or to fix this on professional organization, not family business. Okay. I think the question is toward the professional organization. Beside management leadership attribute, is there anything which can motivate the current team to drive this at the fullest level for the new successor team? Okay. So the whole point is about now the business are well established. It's no longer family business. How do you drive? How does the board drive the C-suite to be serious and be accountable and be motivated to get the succession planning and develop the pipeline of the leadership?
It's a wonderful question. I mean, the first question that comes to my mind is why are we an organization in the first place? Why are we here? What are we trying to do? And what are we trying to leave behind when we finish with our time here as leaders? And I think most people, when they really get time to confront that question, will want two things to be true when they leave. They want a good business situation, and they want the people who work in the organization to be proud and to have a place that they want to come and work, where they want to stay. That's strategy and culture. And I think if you're trying to take care of both of those things, you become concerned with your legacy. You become concerned with what happens when you're gone. You become concerned with the well-being of the people who take over for you when you're gone. The mark of a great leader is to leave behind successful people, whether it's temporary or permanent. When they leave, everything goes well. And I think if we give teams a chance to ask why are we doing this? What are we trying to create? Not in the short term, not next year, but long term. Why did we do this in the first place? What are we trying to build? I think it goes to purpose. It goes to the reason we decided to build this organization in the first place. It's not all about money.
Yeah, I think a lot of people right now, they think that because time is limited and resources are limited. Priority is very important. But can we, while the management is busy firefighting and trying to keep up with the KPI, is there a way that they can do that together with team building and with the succession planning, and get that to enhance each other and get the synergy? Because it sounds to me like either you do this or you do that. It's a zero-sum game in terms of energy and time. Is there a synergy that, okay, we are doing firefighting, we are expanding the market, and at the same time, there is a development of the leadership that is a part of that, and make that firefighting more efficient, or make that expansion of the market more efficient? You see what I'm saying?
Kun Kovac, would it be fair if I rephrased your question? Would it be appropriate to say, what is the business case for development?
Okay.
Is that part of what you're asking? I mean, why?
Yeah, that's part of what I'm asking.
Because I think that is at the heart of what a lot of organizations wrestle with, because at first glance, sometimes development feels like nice to have, not must have, not the same as cost management, not the same as quality assurance, not the same as customer experience, not the same as digital transformation. Except as soon as we stop and think about it for a moment, and we realize that if in 18 months, 3 of our senior team members are going to retire, and if we don't have replacements for those 3 players, or if the replacements for those 3 players, if 2 of them fail, what is the cost to our business? And every time I have ever done a cost analysis of the cost of failure in executive roles, or the cost of time spent waiting to put someone in a role, the zeros end up showing up at the end of the number, because the cost to the business becomes enormous. And then when you start to add on the cost to the culture and the time lapse of success and performance and how long we have to wait, very quickly you start to realize that sustaining continuity in leadership is one of your most consequential management functions. It is one of the highest impact things you can possibly do, because fundamentally businesses, organizations, whether they are professional organizations or family-owned businesses, they are about people. And if you cannot stabilize the people equation, you put the business at risk. And sometimes it takes a minute to talk about that and to get people to realize it, because development is not just for learning something new. Development is for preparing to do something we need you to do. That's what development is. That's when it's valuable. Preparing to understand how to execute a business critical function. That's development. If it's just nice to have, and you're going to go do it in a back room and no one's going to pay attention, then I would legitimately question it and say, should we spend money on that when we don't have enough resources to do the other things we need? I would then agree. Don't spend your time on that kind of development. Spend your time on development that makes a difference to your business. And that means designing it in a way to make sure that it makes a difference to the business. Did I answer your question?
Partially, as time is running out, maybe I want to thinking out loud, and you comment on this one. Can we embed development plan into all the activities that we're doing? Because I thought that means that we kind of merge the development plan into all the strategic things. For example,
Yes.
Okay, banking business is being deeply disrupted by technology. And by doing the sandbox of new venture, new way of service, by putting the management or even one level or two level down to be in charge of that, they learn how to fail, they learn how to take risks, they learn how to understand the world from different perspectives. It's like business development and personal development or career development at the same time. Can board and management set the environment where running business, where development of the team is a part of running business?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we do it every day. And I would do it like this. If one of my hands is job performance and another one of my hands is learning and development, this is what needs to happen. Same thing. Same thing. What your performance space is where you can learn, but not if you don't plan for it. Not if you just expect it to happen and don't target the areas that you're trying to learn or target the areas that are unique to me. This is the part that I think a lot of organizations get wrong. They say the job performance is development. Put her in the job. Get him in the assignment. Go do it, sink or swim. And that only works sometimes. And more often than not, it doesn't work. And so we sit back and we say, gee, why are so many executives failing? Because we didn't plan. We didn't plan for their development. We didn't plan for their growth. We didn't help them manage their own risk. And we can do that by putting together the right assessment and the right development experiences that help people see their own profile against a future assignment so that they can target their learning. One final thought. I am right now working with that energy company. 2 years ago, we conducted assessments of all of their senior team. On Friday, I will be with the board presenting the development progress of the 12 senior team members. And what I can tell you is that this organization is an organization that is transformed. They have handled COVID very differently than they ever would have, because every leader came into COVID knowing about the key risk areas and strengths that they each have. A lot of executives know about their strengths, but a lot of them don't anticipate their risk areas when they're going to get under pressure or they're going to face a new challenge. But this is a team of people that one by one, each person came into COVID being self-aware about their own challenges, and they were able to learn quickly, practice new skills, try different things, take different approaches. And I think it's fair to say that their entire organization is reshaped. Not totally, not top to bottom, not everything different, but their entire senior team was able to act differently in COVID and be more efficient and more effective with a little bit of information about what to do in development while performing.
So you're saying that even in crisis management, that would be the development of cross-functional management.
Exactly.
Exactly. So with
Precisely.
the conscious of the time, and we have a lot of information here, the 5 scenarios that could make the succession go wrong or not as good as it should be. And also what the key takeaway that I personally get from this is that firstly, succession planning is very important because business environment is getting more and more difficult. It's not as simple as the shop house business in the past anymore. If the founder start from scratch, start from shop house, now he's handling a building, a 100-story building to the next generation. And that
Yes.
takes a lot of system and thinking and preparing to take over that, because it's not a shop house anymore.
Right.
The second one is that if it takes the whole C-suite and probably one level below to make a succession plan work, not only the CEO, the board and the C-suite and one level down has to kind of engage each other, but may not be at the board meeting, but we have to get a platform that get them to know each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because once they know each other and they trust each other, they understand each other, then it comes to aligning of expectation of each other, which is what you should say. Okay. And lastly, what I got it from this, which is really important, this one is my favorite one, is that 1 hour ago, before we talk this, I thought that we have to choose between the time to build business or the time to develop people. We are saying at the end that we can make it two-sided coin, do it at the same time. You have given the scenario of crisis management fighting that bring out the new skill of cross-functioning management, or even business development, the sandbox, and get the management to understand how to fail and learn from it. Am I right that probably the company or organization that can merge these two, business activity, strategy, and team development together as one, they are on their way to success?
Yes, they're at least managing their risk, right? And doing so in a transparent and proactive way. I think we have to acknowledge that leadership is risk, succession is risk, every decision is risk. Yes, so yes, I agree totally. Well said.
Once again, every time I talk, I listen to you, I learn a lot. And I would like to, is there anything you want to leave for the audience before we close?
I think you've said it very well. Only thank you so much for having me.
So thank you, Kun Matt, for a great contribution on succession planning, which is about the team, not about a person. Thanks to everyone, all the members, for joining these activities, and thanks for your support to IODs. And thanks to Indorama Venture Public Company Limited for supporting these activities. And please follow us on the next activities on social media and our website. For now, ขอบคุณครับ สวัสดีครับ